The sound of a pistol shot cracked through the dawn air as Katherine Zimmerman emptied her husband's grave of the last outlaw who had dared to desecrate it. The man fell backward into the freshly dug soil, his body landing with a dull thud against Thomas Zimmerman's coffin, which had been partially unearthed by his accomplices, who now lay scattered around the cemetery, either dead or having fled into the darkness. Katherine's hands trembled as she lowered the smoking colt, her wedding ring catching the first light of day as it spilled across the hills surrounding Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1877. "May you rest in peace now, Thomas," Katherine whispered, her voice barely audible over the gentle morning breeze rustling through the cottonwoods that surrounded the small cemetery. The irony wasn't lost on her that her husband, who had died protecting their small ranch from rustlers just 3 months prior, would need her protection even in death. At 32, Katherine had believed her life story was written widow of a failed rancher, childless with nothing but a struggling cattle operation and a mountain of debt. The townsfolk of Silver Creek had already begun their whispers about how long she'd last, before selling out to the Harrington outfit that had been buying up all the small ranches in the territory. Katherine wiped a tear from her cheek with the back of her gloved hand and tucked the pistol into the folds of her black mourning dress. She would need to fetch the sheriff to deal with the bodies, but first, she had to restore her husband's grave. The sun was climbing higher in the sky when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She reached for her pistol again, spinning around to face whoever was coming. Her heart hammered in her chest, wondering if the outlaws had returned with reinforcements. Instead, a lone rider appeared on the path leading to the cemetery. He rode tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the morning light. As he drew closer, Katherine could make out his features, a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat, dark hair peppered with gray at the temples, and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat as he dismounted. His voice was deep and resonant like distant thunder. "Heard gunfire. Everything all right?" Katherine lowered her weapon slightly but kept it visible. "Just dealing with some grave robbers, sir." The stranger surveyed the scene, his eyes taking in the bodies and the partially exhumed coffin. "Grave robbers or something more?" "They were after the map," Katherine said before she could stop herself. She immediately regretted the words Thomas had made her swear to tell no one. The stranger nodded slowly. "The name's Wade Fletcher," he said, extending his hand, "was passing through when I heard the shots." Katherine hesitated before shaking his hand. "Katherine Zimmerman, was my husband's grave." Wade Fletcher looked down at the disturbed earth. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Zimmerman. Let me help you set this right before more trouble finds you." "I can manage," Katherine said stiffly. "I'm sure you can," Wade replied, already removing his coat and rolling up his sleeves. "But 4 hands work faster than 2, and if there's a map worth killing for, those men might have friends who will be along shortly." Katherine couldn't argue with his logic. Together, they worked in silence, repositioning the coffin and shoveling dirt back into the grave. When they had finished, Katherine placed the small bouquet of wildflowers she had brought that morning on the fresh mound. "Thank you," she said simply. Wade nodded. "Where are you headed now?" "To town. Need to inform Sheriff Daniels about what happened here." "I'll ride with you," Wade said, and something in his tone made it clear this wasn't an offer but a statement of fact. Katherine wanted to refuse, to tell this stranger she didn't need an escort, but the truth was she was tired. Tired of fighting alone, tired of the fear that had become her constant companion since Thomas's death. "Very well, Mr. Fletcher." They rode side by side down the dusty road leading to Silver Creek, a small but growing town nestled in a valley surrounded by the rolling foothills that eventually gave way to the majestic mountains of Wyoming. The main street was beginning to stir with morning activity as they arrived, storekeepers sweeping their boardwalks, the blacksmith already at work with his hammer, the smell of fresh bread wafting from the bakery. Sheriff Daniels was pouring himself coffee when they entered his office. A heavy-set man with a bushy mustache, he'd been sympathetic to Katherine's situation, but had made it clear that, with just one deputy, protecting her remote ranch was beyond his capabilities. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, straightening up. His eyes moved to Wade. And who might this be? Wade Fletcher, Wade answered before Katherine could speak. Just passing through. Found Mrs. Zimmerman defending her husband's grave from desecration this morning. The sheriff's eyes widened. Grave robbers in Silver Creek, Katherine shook her head. Not ordinary grave robbers, Sheriff. They were looking for something specific. She explained what had happened, omitting any mention of a map. Wade noticed her omission but said nothing. Sheriff Daniels sighed heavily. I'll send my deputy out to collect the bodies. Mrs. Zimmerman, have you considered that it might be safer for you in town? The Harrington offer is still open, I'm told. I'm not selling, Katherine said firmly. That land has been in Thomas's family for 20 years. It's all I have left of him. Suit yourself, the sheriff said, reaching for his hat. But I can't guarantee your safety out there, especially if trouble's brewing. After they left the sheriff's office, Wade walked beside Katherine as she headed toward the general store. You didn't tell him about the map, Wade observed quietly. Katherine stopped and turned to face him. What do you know about maps, Mr. Fletcher? Only that men don't typically die for worthless ones, he replied evenly. Katherine studied him for a long moment. There was something in his eyes that spoke of experiences beyond those of an ordinary drifter intelligence, certainly, but also a certain wariness that came from having seen too much of the world's darker side. Are you planning to stay in Silver Creek long, Mr. Fletcher? She asked finally. Hadn't decided yet, might depend on the company. Despite herself, Katherine felt her cheeks warm slightly. It had been a long time since a man had looked at her the way Wade Fletcher was looking at her now, as if she were worth seeing. I need supplies, she said, changing the subject. And then I'm heading back to my ranch, Wade nodded. I'll help you load them. A woman alone might have trouble with heavy sacks of flour and such. Katherine wanted to tell him she'd been managing on her own for months, but the truth was, the offer of help was welcome. They entered Abernathy's general store, where Katherine handed over her list to Mr. Abernathy, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose. The usual Mrs. Zimmerman, he asked cheerfully. Yes, and add some extra ammunition for the Winchester, if you please. Mr. Abernathy's eyebrows rose, but he made no comment as he began gathering her supplies. Wade wandered the store, examining various items with casual interest, though Katherine noticed his attention never strayed far from her or the door. As they were loading the supplies onto Katherine's wagon, a commotion erupted down the street. A group of riders had entered town, dust billowing behind them. At their head was Edgar Harrington, the largest cattle baron in the territory, a man whose ambition was matched only by his ruthlessness. Trouble? Wade asked quietly. Harrington, Katherine replied, her voice tight. He's been trying to buy my land since before Thomas died, became more insistent after. The riders stopped in front of the saloon and Harrington dismounted. He was a tall man, expensively dressed, with cold eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Those eyes now fixed on Katherine, and his thin lips curved into what might charitably be called a smile. Mrs. Zimmerman, he called, striding toward them. A pleasure to see you in town. I heard about the unfortunate incident at the cemetery this morning. Katherine stiffened. News travels fast. In a small town, always. Harrington's gaze shifted to Wade. And who might your companion be, Wade Fletcher? Wade said, extending his hand. Harrington ignored the gesture. New to these parts, Mr. Fletcher? Just passing through, I see. Harrington turned his attention back to Katherine. Mrs. Zimmerman, in light of recent events, I'd like to renew my offer for your property. I'm prepared to be quite generous enough for you to start a new life somewhere safer. My answer hasn't changed, Mr. Harrington, Katherine said firmly. The Z-Z is not for sale. Harrington's false smile faded. You're being unreasonable, Mrs. Zimmerman. A woman alone cannot manage a cattle ranch in this territory. It's only a matter of time before you fail or worse. She doesn't appear to be alone at the moment, Wade observed mildly. Harrington's cold eyes flashed with anger. This doesn't concern you, stranger. Actually, Wade said, his voice still casual but with an edge that hadn't been there before, when a man threatens a lady in my presence, it becomes my concern. I made no threats, Harrington snapped, merely pointed out the realities of her situation. Then we have nothing more to discuss, Katherine said, climbing onto the wagon seat. Good day, Mr. Harrington. Wade mounted his horse, tipping his hat to Harrington with mock politeness before following Katherine's wagon out of town. They rode in silence for several minutes before Katherine spoke. You shouldn't have antagonized him. Harrington is a dangerous man, Wade chuckled. I've met dangerous men before, Mrs. Zimmerman. Most aren't half as dangerous as they think they are, Katherine glanced at him. And the other half? Those are the ones you have to watch carefully, Wade replied, his expression serious now. Your Mr. Harrington strikes me as the calculating type. He won't make a move unless he's certain of the outcome. He's not my Mr. Harrington, Katherine said sharply. And his calculations have been clear enough. He wants my land because it controls access to the Northern Valley and the water rights that come with it. They crested a hill, and the Z-Bar-Z Ranch came into view below them, a modest main house with a stone chimney, a barn, a corral, and several outbuildings. It wasn't large by Wyoming standards, but the location was prime, nestled in a protected hollow with a year-round creek running through it. It's a fine piece of land, Wade commented. I can see why he wants it. It's more than land, Katherine said softly. It's home. As they approached the ranch, Katherine felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the knowledge that she would once again cross the threshold alone, that Thomas would not be waiting for her with his warm smile and gentle embrace. 3 months had done little to dull the pain of his absence. Wade helped her unload the supplies, carrying the heavier items into the house without being asked. Katherine found herself studying him as he worked, the confident way he moved, the strength in his hands, the occasional smile that transformed his serious face into something unexpectedly handsome. You've been very kind, Mr. Fletcher, she said as they finished, but I've imposed on your time enough. I'm sure you have places to be. Wade glanced around the ranch, taking in the cattle in the distant pasture, the chicken coop that needed repairs, the garden that was only half tended. Actually, Mrs. Zimmerman, I find myself in need of work. I'm handy with cattle, can mend fences, and I'm not afraid of hard labor. If you're in need of a ranch hand, I'd be willing to work for room and board plus a modest wage. Katherine stared at him in surprise. You're offering to work for me? Why? Wade met her gaze steadily. Let's just say I recognize a worthy cause when I see one. Katherine should have refused. She barely knew this man, and hiring him would stretch her already limited resources. But the truth was, she desperately needed help. The ranch was too much for one person to manage, and the regular hands had left after Thomas died, seeking more stable employment. The bunkhouse is empty, she said finally. You can stay there. Meals are at sunrise and sunset. I can pay you $15 a month, but not until after the cattle drive to Cheyenne, Wade nodded. That's fair. When do I start? You already have, Katherine replied, gesturing to the supplies they'd unloaded. The south pasture fence needs mending, and the cattle should be moved to the east section tomorrow, the creeks running high from the spring melt. I'll see to it, Wade said, and there was something in his voice, a certainty, a reliability that Katherine hadn't realized how much she'd missed until that moment. As Wade headed toward the bunkhouse with his saddlebags, Katherine stood on the porch, watching him go. For the first time in months, she felt a small measure of the weight lift from her shoulders. She still didn't know if she could trust Wade Fletcher, but something told her that his arrival might just be the turning point she hadn't dared hope for. The next morning, Katherine woke before dawn, as had been her habit since Thomas's death. Sleep rarely came easily, and when it did, it was haunted by dreams, sometimes of Thomas, sometimes of the ranch being consumed by flames or Harrington's men driving her from her home. She dressed quickly in a simple blouse and riding skirt, her morning clothes set aside for practical work attire. When she emerged from the house, she was surprised to find Wade already up, a fire going in the outdoor cooking pit where a pot of coffee simmered. Morning, he said, pouring her a cup and offering it. Hope you don't mind, thought you might appreciate a hot drink before starting the day. Katherine accepted the cup, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. Thank you, you're up early. Old habit, Wade replied with a shrug. Army life stays with you. You were a soldier, Katherine asked, curious despite herself. Wade nodded, his eyes distant for a moment. Union cavalry. Joined in '63, stayed on after to help with Reconstruction in the South, then moved west with the frontier. That explained the way he carried himself. Katherine thought, the alertness, the discipline. My husband was too young for the war, she said. He came west with his family in '65 looking for a fresh start. And you, Wade asked, how did you end up in Wyoming Territory? Katherine smiled faintly at the memory. I was teaching school in Denver when Thomas came through with a cattle drive. He courted me for all of 2 weeks before proposing. My parents thought I was mad to accept, but I'd fallen in love with him and with the idea of building something together. Sounds like he was a fortunate man, Wade said quietly. Katherine felt a familiar pang of grief. We were happy. Even when times were hard, we had each other. She shook herself, setting down her empty cup. But that's enough reminiscing. We have work to do. They spent the morning moving cattle to the eastern pasture, a task that would have taken Katherine all day alone but was accomplished efficiently with Wade's help. He was good with horses and cattle, she noticed, handling them with a confident ease that spoke of years of experience. As they worked, Katherine found herself watching him, the way the muscles in his arms flexed as he guided his horse, the concentration in his eyes as he studied the herd, the occasional smile when a particularly stubborn steer finally moved in the right direction. It had been so long since she'd had company besides her own thoughts that conversation felt almost foreign, but Wade made it easy. He didn't press her with questions but offered observations about the land, the cattle, the weather-neutral topics that required no emotional investment but gradually built a comfortable rapport between them. By midday, they had completed the cattle move and begun repairs on the south pasture fence. Katherine worked alongside Wade, handing him tools and holding posts while he secured them. The sun was high and hot, and Wade had removed his shirt, revealing a torso marked with scars, some that looked like bullet wounds, others like knife cuts. You've seen your share of trouble, Katherine remarked before she could stop herself. Wade glanced down at his scarred chest and smiled ruefully. Some found, some sought, not all of it during the war, and after. What brought you to Silver Creek? Wade drove another nail into the fence post before answering. Been drifting for a while, worked as a trail boss, a scout for the army, even tried my hand at mining for a spell. Nothing stuck. And now you're fixing fences on a widow's failing ranch, Katherine said with a touch of bitterness. Hardly seems like a step up. Wade looked at her directly, his gray eyes serious. I've learned that it's not what you do that matters, Mrs. Zimmerman, but why you do it. Katherine felt a flutter in her chest at the intensity of his gaze but quickly tamped it down. And why are you helping me, Mr. Fletcher? The truth, this time. Wade was silent for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. I knew your husband, he said finally. Not well, but we crossed paths a few times. He spoke of you often and of his discovery. Katherine's hands stilled on the fence post. What discovery? I believe that's what those men were looking for in his grave, Wade said quietly. The map to the lost Blackwater mine. Katherine felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. The map had been Thomas's secret, his hope for their future, a way to pay off their debts and secure their ranch. He had discovered it among his father's belongings after his death, an old parchment showing the location of a gold mine that had been lost for decades when the original prospector died in a Cheyenne raid. How do you know about that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas and I shared a campfire on the trail last year, Wade explained. He'd had a bit too much whiskey and talked about how he was going to save his ranch with a treasure map. Most men would have dismissed it as drunk talk, but I've heard stories of the Blackwater mine for years. When I heard about his death and then ran into trouble at his grave, well, it wasn't hard to put the pieces together. Is that why you're here? Katherine demanded, anger flaring. For the map, Wade shook his head. I'm here because a good man asked me to look out for his wife if anything happened to him. I gave him my word, Katherine. It was the first time he had used her given name, and something about the way he said it with respect, but also a warmth that had been absent from her life for too long made her anger falter. Thomas asked you to watch over me. He was worried, Wade said simply. Said Harrington had been making threats, that he feared for your safety if anything happened to him. Katherine turned away, blinking back tears. It sounded exactly like something Thomas would do, making arrangements to protect her even after he was gone. Then why wait so long? He's been dead for 3 months. I was in Montana when I heard, Wade explained. Came as soon as I could, wanted to observe before approaching you, make sure there wasn't already someone looking out for you. And instead, you found me shooting grave robbers, Katherine said with a hollow laugh. I found a woman defending what was hers, Wade corrected. With considerable skill, I might add. Despite everything, Katherine felt a small smile tug at her lips. Thomas insisted I learn to shoot, said a rancher's wife needed to be able to protect herself. Smart man, Wade commented, returning to his work on the fence. They completed the repairs in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Katherine made a decision. The map isn't in the grave, she said quietly. Thomas gave it to me the night before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I should wait until things quieted down, then find the mine myself. Wade nodded slowly. Harrington knows about it. I believe so. One of his men worked for us briefly last year, might have overheard something. 3 weeks later, rustlers hit our herd, and when Thomas went after them, she trailed off, unable to finish, and now they're searching his grave, thinking he took the secret with him, Wade concluded, which means they don't know you have it. No one knows, Katherine said. I haven't even looked at it since he gave it to me. It's felt wrong somehow, like admitting he's really gone. Wade laid down his hammer and turned to face her fully. Katherine, if Harrington believes the map exists, he won't stop looking for it. And eventually, he'll realize you must know something. What are you suggesting? She asked, though she already knew the answer. We find the mine first, Wade said. Before Harrington or anyone else gets to it, use whatever's there to save your ranch. Katherine looked out over the land that she and Thomas had poured their hearts into, the gentle slopes dotted with cattle, the creek winding through the property, the distant mountains purple in the fading light. Could she risk everything on a treasure map that might lead nowhere? Could she trust this man who had appeared in her life so suddenly? We'll talk about it tonight, she said finally. After supper. The kitchen was warm and filled with the aroma of beef stew as Katherine and Wade sat at the sturdy wooden table Thomas had built in their first year of marriage. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the events of the day settling between them. This is good, Wade said, reaching for another piece of cornbread. Been a long while since I had a home-cooked meal. It's nothing special, Katherine replied, though she felt pleased by the compliment. Just what I had on hand. Still, Wade insisted, it's the company that makes a meal worth remembering. Katherine glanced up to find him watching her with that same intensity she'd noticed before, as if he were trying to read something written in her features. It made her feel both seen and exposed in a way that was simultaneously uncomfortable and exhilarating. After they had finished eating and the dishes were washed and put away, Katherine retrieved a small wooden box from behind a loose board in the pantry. She placed it on the table between them, her hand resting protectively on its lid. Thomas's father bought this box in San Francisco, she explained. Said it was made by a Chinese craftsman who claimed it could only be opened by someone with honest intentions. Wade raised an eyebrow. An interesting claim. There's a trick to it, Katherine admitted with a small smile. She pressed several spots on the elaborately carved surface in sequence, and the lid popped open with a soft click. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded red silk, lay a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age. Katherine lifted it carefully and unfolded it on the table. The map was hand-drawn but detailed, showing landmarks, distances, and directions leading from a spot marked Lightning Rock to the entrance of the Blackwater mine. Wade studied it without touching, his eyes moving methodically over the markings. Lightning Rock, he murmured. That's the formation about 20 miles north of here in the foothills, shaped like a bolt of lightning struck by it so often the rock scorched black in places. You know it. Katherine asked, surprised. Wade nodded. Passed it a few times. Remote area, not much reason for folks to go there unless they're hunting or running from something. He traced the route with his finger, hovering just above the parchment. According to this, the mine entrance is about 5 miles northwest of the rock, in a box canyon. Hard country to navigate, probably why it's remained lost all these years. Do you think it's real? Katherine asked, the question that had been haunting her since Thomas first showed her the map. Wade considered before answering. The Blackwater strike is legendary in these parts. Story goes that an old prospector named Jeremiah Blackwater found a vein so rich he could fill a saddlebag with gold in a day, made 3 trips to Denver to deposit his findings before disappearing. Some say Indians got him, others that he died in a rockslide. Either way, no one's found his mine since. But do you believe this map leads to it? Katherine pressed. Wade's eyes met hers. I believe your husband thought it did, and I believe men are willing to kill for it. That's enough for me to think it's worth investigating. Katherine folded the map and returned it to the box. It would take several days to reach the area and search for the mine. I can't leave the ranch unattended that long. Do you have any neighbors you trust? Someone who could keep an eye on things for a few days. Katherine thought of the Hanson family, whose property bordered hers to the south. They had been friends with Thomas, and old Mr. Hanson had helped her with some repairs after the funeral. Perhaps, but even if we find the mine, what then? I know nothing about mining. One step at a time, Wade suggested. First, we confirm if the mine exists, and if there's anything worth taking from it, then we worry about extraction. Katherine studied him in the lamplight, trying to reconcile the stranger who had appeared at the cemetery with this man who now sat at her table, discussing a treasure hunt as calmly as if they were planning to move cattle. There was something about him that inspired confidence, a steadiness, a capability that had been notably absent from her life these past months. Why would you help me with this? She asked finally. Even if you promise Thomas, this goes beyond looking out for his widow. Wade was silent for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the wooden tabletop. I've spent most of my life wandering, he said at last. After the war, it seemed like the only thing to do, but a man gets tired of drifting eventually, starts looking for something worth stopping for. Their eyes met across the table, and Katherine felt a warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the stove at her back. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to think of a future beyond mere survival that the possibility of something more something with this man whose quiet strength had already begun to fill the empty spaces in her home was both terrifying and thrilling. We'll leave in 2 days, she said, making her decision. I'll speak to the Hansons tomorrow about watching the ranch, Wade nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I'll make preparations. We'll need supplies, weapons, tools. As they continued to discuss the practicalities of their expedition, Katherine found herself laughing for the first time in months at Wade's dry observations about the challenges they might face. The weight of grief and loneliness that had been her constant companion seemed to lighten, if only for this evening, replaced by something she had almost forgotten: hope. Later, as Wade bid her goodnight and headed back to the bunkhouse, Katherine stood on the porch watching his retreating figure. The night was clear, stars scattered across the Wyoming sky like diamonds on black velvet. Thomas had loved nights like this, often pulling her outside just to stand in silent appreciation of the vastness above them. I hope you'd approve, Thomas, she whispered to the stars. I think you would. For the first time since his death, the thought of her husband brought a smile rather than tears. Whatever happened with the mine, with Wade Fletcher, with Harrington, she was no longer merely surviving. She was beginning to live again. The next day passed in a flurry of preparation. Katherine rode to the Hanson farm and arranged for their son, Jacob, to check on the ranch daily while she was away. She told them she was traveling to Cheyenne on business related to the ranch's finances, a story that wasn't entirely untrue but omitted the true nature of her journey. Wade, meanwhile, prepared their supplies: food, ammunition, tools for digging and climbing, medical supplies, and other necessities for several days in the wilderness. He also mended Katherine's saddle and checked both their horses carefully, replacing one of her mount's shoes that showed signs of wearing thin. They worked together efficiently, moving around each other with an ease that belied their short acquaintance. More than once, Katherine caught herself watching Wade as he worked, the competent movement of his hands, the concentration in his expression, the occasional smile when their eyes met. Each time, she quickly looked away, chiding herself for such foolishness. He was here to help her find the mine and fulfill a promise to her husband, nothing more. Yet there was something undeniable growing between them, a connection that went beyond their shared purpose. It manifested in small ways. The coffee he had waiting for her each morning, the way he listened intently when she spoke of the ranch and her hopes for it, the brush of his hand against hers when passing tools that lingered just a moment longer than necessary. The evening before their departure, Katherine sat at her small writing desk, penning a letter to be delivered to Sheriff Daniels if she didn't return. It outlined her suspicions about Harrington's involvement in Thomas's death and the subsequent attempts to find the map. She sealed it and placed it in a drawer, hoping it would never need to be read. As she was preparing for bed, a knock came at the door. She opened it to find Wade standing there, his expression grave. "Riders coming," he said without preamble. 6 of them moving fast. Katherine's heart lurched. "Harrington's men, most likely. Get your rifle and stay inside. I'll handle this." "This is my home," Katherine said firmly, already reaching for the Winchester that hung above the fireplace. "I'll stand with you." Wade looked as if he wanted to argue but nodded instead. "Stay on the porch in the shadows. I'll meet them in the yard." They positioned themselves strategically, Wade standing openly in the yard, illuminated by the moon and the lantern hanging from the barn, Katherine concealed in the darkness of the porch, her rifle ready. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, and then 6 riders appeared, silhouetted against the night sky as they crested the hill leading to the ranch. The riders slowed as they approached, clearly surprised to find someone waiting for them. At their head was a man Katherine recognized as Harrington's foreman, Sam Decker, a cold-eyed former bounty hunter with a reputation for brutality. "Evening," Wade called casually as they drew near. "Little late for a social call." Decker reined in his horse, the others fanning out behind him. "We're not here for socializing, Fletcher. Where's the widow?" "Mrs. Zimmerman is resting," Wade replied. "Whatever business you have can wait until morning," Decker sneered. "Our business won't take long. Mr. Harrington sent us to deliver a message." "Is that so?" Wade's voice remained calm, but Katherine could see his hand had moved closer to his holstered pistol. "And what message would that be?" "He's concerned about Mrs. Zimmerman's safety," Decker said with mock sincerity. "What with grave robbers and such in the area, thought we might patrol her property tonight, make sure no harm comes to her or her belongings." "That's very thoughtful," Wade replied, "but unnecessary. I'm keeping watch." One of the riders spat on the ground. "1 man against 6, those ain't good odds, mister." "Depends on the man," Wade said mildly. "And I'm not alone." As if on cue, Katherine stepped forward into the light, her rifle leveled at Decker's chest. "Mr. Harrington's concern is noted, gentlemen. Now I suggest you leave my property immediately." Decker's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. After a tense moment, he chuckled. "Well now, ain't this cozy? The widow's found herself a protector." He looked back at Wade. "You know who you're dealing with, Fletcher. Mr. Harrington doesn't take kindly to interference in his affairs." "Neither do I," Wade replied, his hand now resting openly on his pistol. "And Mrs. Zimmerman's ranch is not Harrington's affair, it's hers." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats, the only sounds the shifting of horses and the distant call of a night bird. Finally, Decker shrugged. "Have it your way, for now." He turned his horse, gesturing for the others to follow. "But Mr. Harrington will be hearing about this." "Tell him I said hello," Wade called after them, his tone pleasant but his eyes hard as flint. They watched until the riders disappeared over the hill, then Wade turned to Katherine. "They'll be back. Maybe not tonight, but soon." Katherine nodded, lowering her rifle. "All the more reason to find the mine quickly. We should leave at first light." "Agreed, and we should take precautions. They might follow us." They spent another hour discussing their route, planning to take a circuitous path to throw off any pursuit before heading toward Lightning Rock. When they finally parted for the night, Katherine found herself reluctant to see Wade go, the ranch house suddenly seeming too quiet, too empty after the tension of the confrontation. "Wade," she called as he reached the steps. He turned back, his face half in shadow. "Thank you for standing with me." He He smiled then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his weathered face. Always, Katherine, get some rest. Tomorrow's journey begins early. As promised, they set out before dawn, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten as they rode away from the ranch. Katherine had dressed practically for the journey in trousers, a flannel shirt, and a sturdy jacket, with her hair braided and tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Wade had nodded approvingly at her attire, commenting that skirts had no place on a wilderness expedition. They rode northwest, initially following established trails before veering off into more rugged terrain. Wade led them through a series of switchbacks and creek crossings designed to confuse any pursuers, occasionally stopping to listen or study the horizon behind them. By midday, they had covered considerable ground, the landscape changing from the rolling grasslands of Katherine's ranch to more broken country rock outcroppings, scattered pine forests, and steep ravines. They paused to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch in the shade of a massive boulder. "Do you think they followed us?" Katherine asked, scanning the terrain they had traversed. Wade shook his head. "If they did, they've fallen well behind. We've made good time." Katherine studied the map again, tracing their progress with her finger. "According to this, Lightning Rock should be visible from the high ridge ahead. Once we reach it, we'll have a better idea of our exact location." Wade nodded, then hesitated before speaking. "Katherine, there's something I should tell you." She looked up, noting the serious expression on his face. "What is it?" "I wasn't entirely honest about how I knew Thomas," he said, his eyes meeting hers directly. "We were more than passing acquaintances. We served together briefly during the war, and afterward we both worked as scouts for the Army in Dakota Territory. He saved my life during a Sioux attack in '70. Katherine stared at him, processing this new information. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I wasn't sure how much he'd told you about his past," Wade explained. "Some men prefer to leave certain chapters behind when they start a new life." "Thomas told me he'd been a scout," Katherine said slowly, "but he rarely spoke of specific incidents." She frowned. "He never mentioned you." "We lost touch when he left the Army to start ranching," Wade said. "Didn't reconnect until last year when I happened through Wyoming. That's when he told me about the map and his concerns about Harrington." Katherine was silent for a moment, absorbing this revelation. It explained Wade's willingness to help her, his familiarity with Thomas's character, but it also raised new questions. "Is there anything else I should know?" Wade's expression turned grave. "Just one thing. If the Blackwater mine is real and if it's as rich as the legends say, it could be dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with Harrington or claim jumpers." "What do you mean?" "Gold changes people, Katherine. I've seen it happen. Men who were friends for years will kill each other over a rich strike. I don't want that happening to us." The implication in his words that there was an us to be concerned about hung in the air between them. Katherine found herself studying his face, looking for signs of deception, but saw only genuine concern. "I have no interest in wealth for its own sake," she said finally. "I just want enough to save my ranch and live without Harrington's shadow over me." Wade's expression softened. "I believe you. Just wanted it said before we go further." They continued their journey, climbing steadily into more mountainous terrain. By late afternoon, they had reached the high ridge Wade had mentioned, and from its summit they could see for miles in every direction. The landscape spread before them in a breathtaking panorama of forests, canyons, and distant peaks. "There," Wade said, pointing northward. "Lightning Rock." Katherine followed his gesture and saw it a tall, jagged formation that indeed resembled a bolt of lightning frozen in stone. It rose from the forest floor like a sentinel, its surface darker than the surrounding rock, bearing the scars of countless strikes. "It's bigger than I imagined," she commented. "About 200 feet high," Wade confirmed. "We should reach it by tomorrow noon if we make good progress in the morning." They made camp in a protected hollow just below the ridge, using a small, nearly smokeless fire to heat coffee and cook a simple meal of bacon and beans. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly, and Katherine found herself grateful for the warm bedroll Wade had insisted she bring. They sat side by side, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky, the fire casting a warm glow on their faces. The wilderness around them was alive with night sounds, the distant howl of a wolf, the hooting of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. "It's beautiful," Katherine said softly. "I'd almost forgotten how it feels to be away from the ranch, from all the responsibilities." Wade nodded. "There's a freedom in the wilderness, no expectations, no judgments, just you and the land." "Is that why you've wandered so long?" she asked. "For the freedom." Wade was silent for a moment, his eyes on the fire. "Partly," he admitted. "After the war, it was hard to settle in one place. Too many ghosts, too many memories. Easier to keep moving." "And now?" Katherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Wade turned to look at her, the firelight reflecting in his gray eyes. "Now I'm starting to think I've been running from the wrong things. Maybe what I need isn't more distance, but roots." Katherine felt her heart quicken at his words, at the way he was looking at her as if she were something precious, something worth stopping for. Without conscious thought, she found herself leaning toward him, drawn by a force as natural and inevitable as gravity. Their lips met softly, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. His hand came up to cup her cheek, gentle but sure, and Katherine felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire beside them. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you standing over that grave, pistol in hand," he murmured. Katherine laughed softly. "Not the most romantic first impression." "On the contrary," Wade said, his thumb stroking her cheek. "I saw a woman of courage and determination." "What could be more admirable than that?" They talked long into the night, sharing stories of their lives before they met Katherine, of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her journey west to teach, her courtship with Thomas. Wade of his upbringing in Ohio, his experiences during and after the war, his adventures in the territories. With each story, each laugh, each shared glance, the connection between them deepened. When they finally settled into their separate bedrolls, Katherine lay awake for some time, listening to Wade's steady breathing nearby. A part of her felt guilty for the happiness bubbling within her, as if by finding joy with another man, she was somehow betraying Thomas's memory. Yet another part knew that Thomas would have wanted her to live fully, to find companionship and love again. "We'll find your mind tomorrow, Thomas," she whispered to the stars, "and then perhaps I can truly begin again." Morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. They broke camp efficiently and continued northward, the terrain growing increasingly rugged as they approached Lightning Rock. By midday, they had reached its base, a massive formation of black streaked stone that seemed to pierce the sky. "The map says we need to find a marking on the western face," Katherine said, consulting the parchment. "A symbol that looks like an arrowhead with a cross inside it." They circled the formation, examining the rock's surface carefully. After nearly an hour of searching, Wade called out from a section partially hidden by brush. "Here, I think this is it." Katherine hurried to join him. There, carved into the stone about 5 feet from the ground, was the symbol from the map, an arrowhead containing a simple cross. The carving was weathered but still clearly visible. "According to the map, we need to follow the direction the arrow points for approximately 5 miles, Katherine said, excitement building in her voice. "It should lead to the entrance of a box canyon." The arrow pointed northwest, into a region of dense forest and broken terrain. They mounted up and began following the indicated direction, using Wade's compass to stay on course where landmarks were obscured by trees or terrain features. The going was slow, with fallen trees, rock slides, and steep ravines forcing them to make frequent detours. As the afternoon wore on, Katherine began to worry they might have misinterpreted the map or missed some crucial landmark. Then, as they crested a ridge, the forest opened before them, revealing a narrow canyon cutting between 2 steep rock walls. The entrance was partially hidden by vegetation, but once spotted, it was unmistakable, a natural corridor leading into the mountain. "The box canyon," Wade murmured, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Just where the map said it would be." They approached cautiously, Wade leading the way into the narrow passage. The canyon walls rose sharply on either side, creating a corridor barely wide enough for 2 horses to walk abreast. The floor was rocky but passable, showing signs of an old trail long disused. After about half a mile, the canyon widened slightly into a small basin, perhaps 100 yards across, completely enclosed by sheer rock walls except for the passage they had entered through. A spring bubbled from the base of the northern wall, creating a small pool before trickling away through cracks in the stone. "This is it," Katherine breathed, looking around in awe. The map shows the mine entrance should be near that spring, hidden behind a large boulder shaped like a bear's head. They dismounted and secured their horses near the spring, then began examining the rock face. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the basin, making it difficult to distinguish shapes in the stone. Wade climbed partway up the wall for a better view, scanning methodically. "There." He called down to Katherine. "About 20 yards to your right, that formation, it does look like a bear if you see it from this angle." Katherine moved in the direction he indicated and found herself standing before a massive boulder that, indeed, resembled a bear's head in profile when viewed from Wade's position. It stood against the canyon wall, creating what appeared to be a solid barrier. But as she circled it, she noticed a narrow gap between the boulder and the wall just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "Wade, I think I found something." He scrambled down to join her, and together they examined the gap. Drawing his pistol as a precaution, Wade went first, edging sideways through the narrow opening. Katherine followed, her heart pounding with anticipation and a touch of fear. They emerged into a small cavern, dimly lit by the light filtering through the gap they had entered. As their eyes adjusted, they could make out the unmistakable signs of human activity: old tool marks on the walls, the remnants of support timbers, a rusted lantern hanging from a hook. "It's real," Katherine whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "The Blackwater mine." Wade retrieved the lantern, finding it still contained a small amount of oil. He lit it, and warm yellow light bloomed in the cavern, revealing a tunnel leading deeper into the mountain. "Stay close," he cautioned as they moved forward. "These old mines can be dangerous. Watch for loose rocks overhead and unstable flooring." The tunnel extended about 50 feet before opening into a larger chamber. Here, the signs of mining operations were more evident: pick marks on the walls, an old ore cart on rusted rails, several rotting crates stacked in one corner. But what drew their attention immediately was the far wall of the chamber, where a gleaming vein of gold-flecked quartz ran horizontally across the rock face. "My God," Wade breathed, holding the lantern higher. "It's true." The vein's at least 2 feet wide, and who knows how deep it runs into the mountain. Katherine approached the wall almost reverently, reaching out to touch the glittering surface. Thomas was right. All this time it was real. They spent the next hour exploring the mine, finding 2 additional chambers with similar veins exposed. In one, they discovered Jeremiah Blackwater's crude living quarters: a cot frame, a small table, and various personal effects long abandoned. Among them was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. Wade carefully opened it, revealing meticulous records of ore extracted, along with personal observations about the mine and its surroundings. The final entry, dated May 1857, reads simply, "Heard war drums last night. Cheyenne moving through the valley below. We'll wait them out before making next run to Denver." "He never made it," Wade said quietly, closing the journal. "The Cheyenne must have found him." Katherine nodded solemnly, then turned her attention back to the gold vein. "How much do you think it's worth?" Wade considered, running his hand along the gleaming surface. "Hard to say without proper assaying, but based on what I can see, enough to pay off your debts 10 times over. Enough to make you one of the wealthiest landowners in the territory if you work it properly." The implications of this discovery began to sink in. With this kind of wealth, Katherine could not only save her ranch but expand it, improve it, make it the showpiece Thomas had always dreamed it could be. She could stand against Harrington as an equal, not a vulnerable widow fighting to hold onto her land. But there was something else too, something she hadn't anticipated. Looking at Wade in the golden lantern light, she realized that the mine's treasure paled in comparison to what she had found in him. A partner, a protector. A man who saw her strength and respected it, who stood beside her rather than in front of her. "We should go," Wade said, breaking into her thoughts. "It'll be dark soon, and we need to make camp outside the canyon. Tomorrow we can return with tools to collect samples for the assayer in Cheyenne." They carefully made their way back through the tunnel and out the narrow gap, emerging into the box canyon where their horses waited patiently. The sun was setting, casting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold that seemed fitting given their discovery. As they prepared to leave, a sound echoed through the canyon, the distant but unmistakable report of a rifle shot. Wade immediately drew Katherine into the shadow of the bear-shaped boulder. "Someone's found us," he whispered, his expression grim. Katherine's hand went to her pistol. "Harrington's men, most likely. They must have followed our trail despite our precautions." Wade peered around the boulder toward the canyon entrance. "We're trapped in here. There's only one way out, and they'll be watching it." Katherine felt fear rise in her throat but pushed it down. "What do we do?" Wade thought for a moment, his eyes scanning their surroundings. "Night's coming. That works in our favor. We can hide the horses in that alcove by the spring, then find defensive positions. When it's fully dark, we might be able to slip past them." They quickly moved the horses to a small recess in the canyon wall near the spring, where they would be hidden from casual observation. Then they gathered what weapons and supplies they might need and sought cover among the rocks scattered throughout the basin. As twilight deepened into darkness, they could hear occasional voices and see the faint glow of a campfire at the canyon entrance. Their pursuers had indeed set up a blockade. Wade and Katherine lay side by side behind a fallen boulder, watching and waiting. "How many do you think there are?" Katherine whispered. "Hard to say," Wade replied. "I heard at least 3 different voices. Could be Decker and some of the men from last night." Katherine gripped her rifle tighter. "They must have been watching the ranch, seen us leave. And now they know we've found something worth defending," Wade added. "Otherwise, why would we be in this box canyon?" The implications were clear. Even if they escaped tonight, Harrington would know about the mine. Their discovery wouldn't remain secret for long. As the night deepened, a plan began to form in Katherine's mind. "Wade," she whispered, "I think I know what we need to do." She outlined her idea, bold, risky, but potentially effective. Wade listened intently, then nodded slowly. "It could work, but it's dangerous, especially for you." "No more dangerous than waiting here to be found," Katherine countered. "And this way we control the situation rather than reacting to it." Wade studied her face in the faint starlight, admiration evident in his eyes. "You're an extraordinary woman, Katherine Zimmerman." She smiled despite the tension of their situation. "Let's hope I'm a convincing one as well." They spent the next hour preparing, checking weapons, rehearsing their plan. When all was ready, Wade pulled Katherine close, kissing her deeply. "Be careful," he murmured against her lips. "You too," she replied, drawing strength from his embrace. They separated, each moving to their assigned positions. Katherine circled toward the canyon entrance, staying in the shadows of the wall, her heart pounding but her hands steady. Wade, meanwhile, crept toward their horses, ready for his part in the plan. When she was about 50 yards from the canyon entrance, Katherine could make out the campfire and the silhouettes of 4 men more than they had expected, but not enough to change their strategy. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into a small clearing where the starlight would make her visible and fired a single shot into the air. "Decker," she called out, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I know you're there. I want to talk." The camp erupted into activity, men scrambling for weapons, voices shouting in confusion. After a moment, a familiar figure stepped forward into the firelight. "Mrs. Zimmerman," Decker called back, a note of surprise in his voice. "This is unexpected. Where's your watchdog?" "Fletcher's dead," Katherine replied, infusing her voice with grief and anger. "Snakebite. I need help getting back to town." There was a pause as Decker conferred with his men. Katherine could imagine their suspicion, their debate over whether this was a trap. Finally, Decker called out again. "Come on down to the fire, Mrs. Zimmerman. Slow and easy. We'll talk." Katherine moved forward cautiously, keeping her rifle visible but pointed downward in a non-threatening manner. As she approached the campfire, she could see Decker and 3 other men, all armed, all watching her with varying degrees of wariness. "That's far enough," Decker said when she was about 10 feet from the fire. "Now, why don't you tell us what you're really doing out here? And don't bother with the snakebite story. Fletcher's too tough to die that easy." Katherine managed a bitter laugh. "You're right, I lied. Fletcher isn't dead, he's gone. Took off with the map after we found the mine, left me here to die or find my own way back." Decker's eyes narrowed. "The mine." "You found Blackwater's mine," Katherine nodded, putting on a show of angry betrayal. "It's real, all right. Rich enough to make a man forget his promises. As soon as we confirmed the gold was there, Fletcher changed, said there was no reason to share with a widow when he could have it all." One of the other men spat into the fire. "Sounds about right, never did trust that drifter." Decker studied Katherine, suspicion still evident in his eyes. "And why come to us? You know who we work for." "Because Harrington wants the mine," Katherine said simply, "and I know where it is. I'm willing to make a deal the location in exchange for my ranch. I get clear title, free and clear, and Harrington gets the gold. Everyone wins." Decker laughed. "You've got nerve, I'll give you that, but what's to stop us from just forcing you to show us the mine?" Katherine raised her chin defiantly. "Because I've hidden the key to accessing the main chamber. You'll never find it without me. And if anything happens to me, Wade Fletcher gets away with all the gold while you're stuck in this canyon looking for something you'll never find." The standoff stretched for several tense moments, Decker clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Mrs. Zimmerman, we'll take you to Mr. Harrington. He can decide if your deal is worth taking." "One more thing," Katherine added. "Fletcher took my horse. I'll need to ride with one of you." Decker gestured to the youngest of his men. "Phillips, you'll take Mrs. Zimmerman on your horse. The rest of us will." He never finished the sentence. A thunderous explosion rocked the canyon as the carefully placed dynamite Wade had set near their campsite detonated. In the instant of shock and confusion that followed, Katherine dropped to the ground, covering her head as planned. Gunfire erupted from several directions at once, Wade firing from his position near the canyon wall, his shots precise and measured. Two of Decker's men fell immediately, while Decker himself dove for cover behind a boulder. "You lying bitch," he shouted, firing blindly in Katherine's direction. Katherine had already rolled to the shelter of a fallen log, her own rifle ready. She spotted the fourth man, Phillips, trying to circle behind Wade's position and took careful aim. Her shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. The gunfight continued for several more minutes, with Decker pinned down but returning fire sporadically. Then, above the gunshots, came the sound of galloping hooves. Wade had brought the horses as planned. He rode into the clearing, leading Katherine's mount, firing his pistol with his free hand to provide covering fire. Katherine made a dash for her horse, swinging into the saddle as Wade wheeled his mount around. Together they thundered down the canyon toward the entrance, past the stunned and wounded outlaws. "Stop them," Decker screamed, but his remaining man was in no condition to follow. They burst out of the canyon into the open forest beyond, riding hard through the darkness, Wade leading the way with unerring confidence despite the limited visibility. They didn't slow until they had put several miles between themselves and the Box Canyon, finally stopping in a small clearing to let the horses rest. "Are you hurt?" Wade asked immediately, dismounting and moving to Katherine's side. She shook her head, still breathless from the wild ride. "No." "You, a graze on my arm, nothing serious." He helped her down from her horse, then pulled her into a fierce embrace. "That was some performance back there. You had me convinced you actually believed I'd betrayed you." Katherine laughed against his chest, the adrenaline of their escape making her light-headed. "It worked, didn't it? They believed me just long enough for you to set the charges." Wade pulled back slightly to look at her, his expression serious despite the triumph of their escape. "Harrington will know about the mine now. There's no keeping it secret." "I know," Katherine replied, "but we have something he doesn't legal claim to it. As Thomas's widow, the mine was found on our expedition, using his map. We need to file the claim as soon as possible." "Cheyenne," Wade nodded. "We can be there in 2 days if we ride hard. File the claim with the territorial office and arrange for a proper survey and mining operation." Katherine felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her as the excitement of their escape faded. "Let's find somewhere safe to camp for what's left of the night." I need rest before we start another long ride. They found a secluded spot near a small creek, well off any trail and sheltered by a stand of pines. They made a minimal camp, not risking a fire that might attract attention. Instead, they shared cold provisions and water from the creek, then laid their bedrolls side by side beneath the stars. As they lay together, Wade's arm around her shoulders, Katherine found herself thinking not of the gold or the mine, but of the future stretching before them, a future that just days ago had seemed bleak and lonely, but now held promise and possibility. "What are you thinking?" Wade asked softly, his breath warm against her hair. "About tomorrow," she replied, "and all the tomorrows after that." Wade's arm tightened around her. "I was thinking the same thing." "What will we do?" Katherine asked. "After we file the claim, after we deal with Harrington." "Whatever you want," Wade said. "It's your ranch, your mine, your life." Katherine turned to face him in the darkness. "Our life," she corrected gently, "if you want it to be." Wade was silent for a long moment, and Katherine feared she had presumed too much. Then his hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. "I've wandered long enough," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "If you're offering me a home, Katherine Zimmerman, then yes, I want it to be our life." The journey to Cheyenne was arduous but uneventful. They took a circuitous route to avoid possible pursuit, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses or catch a few hours of sleep. When they finally reached the territorial capital, they went directly to the mining claims office, where they filed the necessary paperwork to establish Katherine's ownership of the Blackwater mine. The clerk was skeptical at first. The Blackwater mine was considered a legend by most, but the detailed map, journal, and gold samples they had brought convinced him of the claim's legitimacy. By that afternoon, Katherine Zimmerman was the legal owner of what would soon become one of the richest gold mines in Wyoming Territory. Their next stop was the Territorial Marshal's office, where they reported the attack at the Box Canyon and their suspicions about Harrington's involvement in Thomas Zimmerman's death. The Marshal, a no-nonsense former Union officer named Hollister, listened carefully to their story. "Harrington has friends in high places," he warned them. "But if what you're saying is true and we can prove it, not even his connections will save him." "We have evidence," Katherine replied, producing Thomas's journal with its detailed accounts of threats from Harrington and suspicious activities around the ranch in the weeks before his death. "And I believe some of his men will talk if pressured properly." Marshal Hollister nodded slowly. "I'll send deputies to Silver Creek to investigate. In the meantime, I suggest you both stay in Cheyenne where I can ensure your safety." They took rooms at the Wyoming Hotel, the finest establishment in Cheyenne, though Katherine insisted on separate accommodations despite Wade's protective instincts. "We've already given the gossips enough to talk about," she explained with a small smile. "Let's not add impropriety to the list." Over the next week, they met with bankers, mining engineers, and investors. The samples from the Blackwater mine caused a sensation in financial circles, with offers of partnership and financing pouring in from as far away as Denver and San Francisco. Katherine, with Wade's steady guidance, navigated these negotiations carefully, ensuring that she maintained controlling interest in both the mine and her ranch. Word came from Marshal Hollister that Decker had been captured trying to cross into Colorado Territory. Under questioning, he had implicated Harrington in not only the attack at the Box Canyon, but also in ordering Thomas Zimmerman's murder. The territorial prosecutor was preparing charges. 10 days after their arrival in Cheyenne, Katherine and Wade stood on the platform of the train station, watching as Edgar Harrington was led away in chains, his face ashen with shock and rage. He had been arrested at his ranch that morning and brought to Cheyenne to stand trial for conspiracy to commit murder and various other charges. "It's over," Katherine said softly as the marshals escorted Harrington into the jailhouse across from the station. "Thomas can truly rest in peace now." Wade took her hand, squeezing it gently. "And you can begin again." They returned to Silver Creek 3 days later, arriving not as fugitives but as respected citizens, their story having preceded them through telegraph messages and newspaper accounts. The same townsfolk who had whispered about how quickly Katherine would fail were now eager to greet her, to offer congratulations and support. At the ranch, they found everything in good order, thanks to the Hansons' diligent care. Katherine walked through the house that had felt so empty, so haunted by memories, and found that it now seemed filled with possibilities. That evening, as the sun set over the Wyoming landscape, Katherine and Wade sat together on the porch, watching as the golden light painted the land in hues that reminded them of the veins in the Blackwater mine. "I received an offer from the Burlington Northern Railroad today," Katherine mentioned, sipping her coffee. "They want to build a spur line to the mine. It would cross the edge of our property." "Our property?" Wade asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Katherine set down her cup and turned to face him fully. "I was hoping it would be, officially." She took a deep breath. "Wade Fletcher, I know this is unconventional and perhaps too soon, but life in the West has taught me not to waste time when you know what you want. I'm asking if you would consider becoming my husband, my partner in all things." Wade's eyes widened in surprise, then crinkled with amusement and tenderness. "Katherine Zimmerman, are you proposing to me?" "I believe I am," she replied, her cheeks flushing but her gaze steady. "Is that a problem?" Wade laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to envelop her. "The only problem is that you beat me to it. I've been carrying this around for days, waiting for the right moment." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a simple but elegant gold band set with a single diamond. "I had it made in Cheyenne, gold from our mine." Katherine's breath caught in her throat as Wade took her hand. "I've spent most of my life wandering, Katherine, never finding a place that felt like home, until I found you. You're the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and if you'll have me, I'd be honored to be your husband." Tears welled in Katherine's eyes as she nodded, words momentarily beyond her. Wade slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silver Creek, with the Hanson family and a few trusted friends in attendance. Katherine wore a gown of ivory silk ordered from Denver, and Wade cut a handsome figure in a new black suit. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, their vows a testament to the unexpected love that had blossomed between them. The development of the Blackwater mine proceeded rapidly, with a small but growing community springing up near the Box Canyon. Katherine and Wade invested the profits wisely, expanding the Z Ranch, improving its operations, and establishing a foundation to benefit the community of Silver Creek, funding a new schoolhouse, a hospital, and other public works. A year after their marriage, Katherine gave birth to a son they named Thomas Wade Fletcher, a healthy, robust boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Elizabeth Katherine Fletcher, with curls as golden as the ore from the mine that had brought her parents together. On the 5th anniversary of their first meeting, Wade surprised Katherine with a gift, a framed copy of the Blackwater mine map, with a simple inscription, "To the treasure that led me to the greatest treasure of all." Katherine, holding their youngest child, a 6-month-old daughter they had named Hope, smiled at her husband across the parlor of their expanded ranch house. Who would have thought that a widow defending her husband's grave and a drifter passing through would end up here? Wade crossed the room to embrace his family, his eyes filled with the contentment of a man who had finally found his home. "I think Thomas knew exactly what he was doing when he made me promise to look after you. Do you think he would be happy with how things turned out?" Katherine asked softly. Wade kissed her forehead gently. "I think he would be proud of the woman who refused to believe her story was finished, who had the courage to write a new chapter." Outside, the Wyoming sun set on the prosperous Z Ranch, gilding the land that had once been Katherine's burden and was now her legacy, a legacy built on courage, determination, and a love that had come unexpectedly, like gold discovered in the most unlikely of places.